I would also like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people on the lands on which we're all meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and note their continuing connection to country and management and responsibility of country and culture, and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are in the room today. I'm going to give this a shot. There we go. So the Australian Land Conservation Alliance represents organisations that work to protect, to manage and to restore nature on across privately managed land, to ultimately grow the impact, the capacity and the influence to achieve a healthy and resilient Australia. And we have a number of members here in the room. When I agreed to the topic of conversation with Gary some months ago now, when I came back more recently to put the conversation together, I realised that the direction I took today depended on the emphasis of the word encourage. Am I talking about encouraging models, commercial and finance models, to invest in nature, or am I talking about encouraging commercial models towards nature? And so I decided that I would talk about both. And so that's trends that are both influencing this greater investment in nature, but also what some of those emerging models are that are showing potential for success. So we have all heard quite a lot over the last 48 hours and most of probably all of our careers, about the current state of our environment. So we have climate change and biodiversity loss as two of our global challenges. Our race to protect, to manage and to restore our incredible ecosystem here in Australia is not being won. The biodiversity crisis is less widely known and understood compared to the climate crisis, though they are increasingly recognised as being interconnected. The State of the Environment report depicted yet again a continuing downward trajectory of the condition of our landscapes. We already knew that 19 ecosystems across Australia were at risk of collapse, and that the population trends of many taxa were now demonstrated through the report again to be continuing to decline. The challenges are well known to us. We've talked about those quite a lot over the last few days: climate change, habitat loss, and the impacts of invasive species. The solutions are also well known to us in the room: protecting, effectively managing and restoring the natural ecosystems and the communities around to support those. And the important thing that these combined efforts address both of our global challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change. So despite the increasing awareness that the health of our environment, the need for clean water, the need for healthy soils, the need for fresh air, support not just biodiversity but also underpin our human well-being, they also underpin our livelihoods, they also underpin our economies. Despite this knowledge, we are not resourcing its management in light of the value that is increasingly understood. In Australia, our national budget remains comparatively small and declining, especially considering some of the costs that we also understand it's going to need to take to implement the solutions we have to hand. That national story is also reflected globally. So we know that the global funding gap is somewhere between $600 and $900 billion per year. It's important to highlight as well that the cost of inaction, of trying to restore the degraded habitat, far exceeds the cost of protecting it before it's gone. And so, yes, in light of this context, what are the trends and the drivers that are encouraging investments in nature? So first and importantly, mainstreaming the understanding and awareness of a number of things. We understand and are much more aware of the important role and responsibility and the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their connections to country, and the importance of their leadership in any of the frameworks that are undertaken and developed. There's a much stronger understanding and awareness of the fact that biodiversity loss is growing, and that stemmed from real life experiences of the impacts of fires, the impacts of floods, and that there is global recognition now being understood. There's increased reporting and communication about these things. This is influencing people's decision making, both in consuming and also in voting and acting. There's also a much stronger recognition of this globally. At leadership levels, we are seeing report after report after report coming out from the World Economic Forum, the UN, Disruptor Review from the UK, all demonstrating our increasing reliance upon nature. We've now got global targets. We have a clear net zero target that's driving climate-related actions, and we have companies and organisations implementing climate-related disclosures. Hopefully, in December, we will have a new strong global biodiversity framework that should be negotiated. There's a lot more conversation around nature positive and also the importance of reducing the rate of extinctions. Some of these global targets are influencing framework development. So there are also encouraging, there's a broader incorporation of sustainable development goals that are driving ESG reporting. The drawing on the Task Force on Climate-related disclosures, financial disclosures, organisations where organisations are required to disclose their risks and dependencies on climate is the Task Force on Nature-related financial disclosures. The impact of that will be that organisations will also need to understand their nature-related dependencies, their nature-related risks, and have to consider how they might mitigate on those that are meaningful to their organisations. There is an importance and a recognition of the role to reform harmful subsidies, so the funds that are being invested into activities and industries that are not, that are having significant negative impacts on the environment are reformed. And banks and investment firms around the world are responding to this demand for impact or ethical investing, and so we're seeing an increased number of emerging models or programs that support investments in nature and culture, sustainable linked loans, for example, or green bonds. Here in Australia, some of you may have heard that we will be creating an Australia Wellbeing Budget. So that's moving us beyond this idea of the GDP. So if that's cleverly constructed, it could ensure that there is a greater understanding and reporting and investing in nature-related activities. There is a huge amount of exploring and trialling a range of environmental accounting frameworks that seek to measure that changing condition of our natural environment. Australia has now set some stronger long-term goals. We now have a domestic 30 by 30 target, so protecting 30% of land and 30% of water here in Australia by 2030. And our threatened species strategy now has a strong towards zero extinctions. And across all of these frameworks, the ones previously at a global level and also here in Australia, we are seeing a need to see that continued valuing of knowledge, of leadership, values and approaches of First Nations people and local communities. And so shifting the emphasis from encouraging to encouraging, what are some of those emerging models that we are starting to see? It's great to see an increasing recognition of the role of private land holders across Australia and their work and responsibility in stewarding land and nature for the future. We're seeing strong incentive programs supporting private landholders and engaging effectively in the stewarding of their land. The Biodiversity Conservation Trust is an example of where we're seeing strong investment in permanent protection of nature, resulting in an increased uptake of landholders and the scale of habitat protected. Further opportunities lie in that intersect between the public good and the private benefit, and there's emerging activities happening here. Carbon is supporting land restoration at scale, but it doesn't always work for biodiversity. And so we're seeing a range of new models around carbon plus, co-benefit models, and really importantly, as Shiloh talked to, core benefit models that are challenging carbon dollars to invest in nature. There's a raft of also emerging voluntary markets. So we've talked about reef credits, cultural fire credits, voluntary biodiversity units. These are all backed by strong protocols for measurement and a focus on impact. And there's an increased range of funds and financing here in Australia as well. We're seeing more green bonds, more impact funds, and more sustainable linked loans, all driving that investment towards nature outcomes. And so while we're pleased to see this growing interest in nature, we also need to keep our eyes on this growing risk. So as big businesses turn their minds to these opportunities and people rush madly towards what we're hearing about, this potential $1 trillion pipeline, we welcome those interests and those opportunities, particularly to filling the funding gap that I was talking about before, while holding ground on the things that matter. So our focus must be maintained on delivering enduring outcomes, not short-term focused programs. The programs must be designed with and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and local communities. And there is a strong need for an eagle eye on both integrity and transparency as we move forward. We want these emerging investments to work, is the fundamental point here. And so as we contemplate as a sector what these trends mean for us and to think about how we might lean into these opportunities, I guess the things that I've been reflecting on are the importance of our networks, the importance of the collaboration that we build through these discussions, and the importance of innovation that was raised across most of this session this afternoon. And what fills me with pride and hope in working across this sector is that the private land conservation sector has this incredible ability to get on and to take action. And so I continue to encourage more of that. Lots of things I've talked about today. There's a range of things, references that you can come and grab. And we'll be in Canberra next week, co-hosting our Conservation Finance Intensive workshop in Canberra. There's still a few tickets left for that. If you want to get down, we'll take a deeper dive into some of these case studies that I've explored today. So thank you very much.